Welcome to the lecture series on the Introduction to Indian Philosophy. As we discussed in the previous lectures that the process of evolution in the Sāṃkhya system is a result of the interaction between Prakriti and Purusha. We know already that Prakriti is the unconscious principle and Purusha is the conscious principle, or rather pure consciousness. So, these are the two opposing realities. Now, when Purusha comes in contact with Prakriti and throws its reflection on Prakriti, a disturbance happens in the three gunas and Prakriti begins to evolve the world. Remember, Purusha is not one but many. So, just imagine there are many reflections of consciousness on Prakriti. And because Prakriti is single and unitary, the objective world that is evolved from it is the same for all the Purushas. We can say that the interaction between the Purushas becomes possible because Prakriti is the same for all. One thing we must understand that this contact between Purusha and Prakriti must not be confused with any kind of union that happens between finite objects. It is in fact an efficacious, constructive and powerful influence on Prakriti by the mere presence of Purusha. You can imagine how a smile comes on your face just by remembering something really pleasant. This is the sort of thing that happens between Purusha and Prakriti. We must understand that it is actually from the three gunas, that is Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, that the entire world has evolved. When these gunas are in the state of equilibrium, that is the natural state of Prakriti, in which all activities remain suspended. So, this is the state of dissolution. When, however, due to the reflection of pure consciousness on Prakriti, this equilibrium of the gunas gets disturbed and they enter into the state of Vikriti, evolution of this world begins. First, it is Rajas, which is the active guna. It becomes aggressive. This aggression of Rajas sets the other two gunas, namely Sattva and Tamas, in motion. The first movement releases a tremendous amount of energy within Prakriti. This effusion of the three different energies becomes increasingly condensed, which leads to the evolution or manifestation of the world in various grades and degrees. Actually, in the state of Vikriti, these gunas are constantly changing. They conflict yet cooperate with each other. A single guna on its own cannot produce anything. It needs the support of the other gunas to produce something, which is why their harmonious action is compared to a lamp flame, which is the result of the cooperation between the wick, oil and fire, which have their distinct natures and yet do the job. It is also important to know at this point that the three gunas are ever active, whether it is the state of evolution or is the state of dissolution. In the state of dissolution or pralaya, the gunas continuously reproduce themselves, whereas in the state of evolution, which is srishti, they act on one another. So you see, Prakriti is dynamic, ever changing, and this process of evolution and dissolution is periodical. Evolution is always followed by dissolution when the whole diversity in which Prakriti manifests itself goes to sleep, but only to wake up again. The world is a systematic, organized whole, obeying its own laws, despite being composed of the three opposing gunas. So, the products or evolutes of Prakriti are all composed of the three gunas. They are only three in number, but they denote a manifold of discrete entities. Now the question is, what is the role of Purusha in this whole evolution? Is it just casting its glance on Prakriti? Well, not quite. Karaka 19 clarifies this when it says, Tasmat cha viparyasat siddham sakshitvam asya purushasya kaivalyam madhyastyam drishtritvam akartri bhavah cha, which means, and from that contrast it is established that the spirit is the pure witness. He is solitary, neutral, spectator and non-agent. So, Purusha is the witness, Sakshi. Prakriti, being the unconscious, irrational principle, is of course devoid of knowledge and insight. However, that to which the whole world is apparent is the witness. Now, Purusha is solitary. Why? Because it is completely different from matter and the different modifications of matter. The Karika also says that Purusha is madhyastha, that is neutral. You can understand this with an analogy which I am taking from Gaudapada's commentary. Now, just as a wandering sadhu is withdrawn and detached while the people of the village are engaged in the fields, Purusha is lonely and unconcerned in the midst of the activities of Prakriti. Then the Karika says Purusha is the spectator. You may wonder why the Karika is using the word spectator for Purusha when in the beginning itself it has called Purusha the witness, as the two mean the same. Actually, these are two different qualities, Sakshi and Drishtritvam. See, as a witness, the Purusha only observes, whereas as a spectator or a seer, the Purusha by the buddhi or intellect understands the phenomena of the material world. Lastly, the Karika says that the Purusha is a non-agent. If we understand the Sāṃkhya system properly, then we know that all actions, whether mental or physical, are due to the three gunas of Prakriti. And the conscious principle, which is Purusha, is in no way subject to the influence of the three gunas. Also, we know that in the Upanishads, action holds an inferior place when compared to knowledge. The self or consciousness, therefore, remains detached from the life of action. Ishwar Krishna discusses another important thing in the 21st Karika, which is Purushasya darshanartham kaivalyartham tatha pradhanasya pangu andhavat ubhayo api samyogah tat kritah sargah, which may be translated as, for the exhibition of nature to the spirit and for the emancipation of the spirit, there is conjunction between the spirit and nature, like the union between the lame and the blind. From this conjunction proceeds creation. In fact, this Karika clearly states the role and purpose of the Purusha in the Sāṃkhya system. It implies that the manifestation of the universe or the whole evolution out of Prakriti happened for the use of the Purusha. For Purusha to gain knowledge about the various evolutes of Prakriti, which would lead him to know himself as distinct from the evolutes of Prakriti, and which ultimately lead him to final liberation. As you can see, Ishwar Krishna illustrates this with a very popular story of a blind man who meets a lame man in a forest. They both agree to help each other to get out of the forest. So, what do? The blind carries the lame on his shoulders so that the blind can walk, and the lame can guide him through the forest and get out of there. Now, just as these two, the blind and the lame, cooperated and united to escape from the forest, similarly, the Prakriti and the Purusha coordinate in the process of evolution as well as in the liberation of the Purusha. Prakriti is like the blind man as it cannot see. Purusha is the lame man as it cannot act. Also, just as non-intelligent milk flows out for the nourishment of the calf, Prakriti serves the purpose of Purusha. In fact, now I want to talk about the innumerable Purushas who have lived, are living, and will live in the future times. Prakriti envelops them in the form of their specific distinct bodies. Here, the specific distinct body does not mean the gross material body that is experienced by the sense organs, which decays and dies in the cycle of births and rebirths. It rather means the subtle body made of subtler elements. This body remains with the Purusha until the final separation from Prakriti happens. So you understand that this union of the Prakriti and Purusha is a peculiar one. But before this final liberation happens for the Purusha, we must understand the different stages of evolution. So, one more important point which is made in the 20th Karika is to be considered, and it is Tasmat tat samyogat acetanam chetanavat ivalingam guna kartritve api tatha karteva bhavati udasinah, which may be translated as, therefore, through this union, the insentient evolute appears as if it is intelligent, and similarly also from the agency belonging to the gunas, the neutral spirit appears as if it were the agent. Now, due to this union, the intellect or buddhi, which is an evolute of Prakriti and therefore which is unintelligent, seems to be intelligent. And so we find expressions like I know. However, this expression makes sense only when Purusha has overviewed the content. Not just that, the Purusha also, due to this proximity with the intellect, seems like an agent. So, it is from this union the intellect seems to think or know and the Purusha seems to act. But of course, according to the system, Purusha acts only insofar as witnessing something is an action. But he is not an agent in the sense of acting on something external or outside of himself is concerned. Prakriti or any of its evolute, whether it is intellect or mind, is absolutely distinct from the Purusha. Just as thought and matter, they are essentially separate. They are of the nature of object and subject. Both have their separate functions. However, it is only due to their union that knowledge is attained. The Purusha experiences that which the intellect unveils to him. So, the Purusha is dependent on Prakriti for gaining knowledge, and that there is nothing superior to the Purusha which may influence or enlighten him. This is perhaps the reason why this system is called atheistic. Now it is time to understand the various evolutes or products of Prakriti. So, in the 22nd Karika, Ishwar Krishna says, Prakriteha maham tataha ahamkaraha tasmat ganaha cha shodashakaha tasmat api shodashakaha panchabhyaha panchabhutani. Now, this may be translated as, from the primordial matter evolves the great principle. From this evolves the I principle. From this evolves the set of 16. From the 5 of this set of 16 evolves the 5 elements. So, as we can see, the process of evolution begins with the union of Purusha, that is consciousness, and Prakriti, which is the material cause of the universe. Metaphorically, it is said that Prakriti is the mother principle and Purusha is the father principle. The mother is fertilized by the father. Prakriti is the soil in which consciousness can take root. Thus, Prakriti, the material cause of all existence, embodies consciousness. There are 24 categories discussed in the Sāṃkhya system. The order in which the evolutes or separate entities are produced is discussed in the Karika 22, which I have just mentioned. You can have a look at this table, which clearly shows the order of evolution. Just have a look. Now here you can see Prakriti at the top, and then there are various evolutes like Mahat, Ahamkar, Manas, Gyanendriyas, Karmendriyas, Tanmatras, and the Mahabhutas. Now let us understand this chart. From Prakriti, which is the first category, is produced Mahat or Buddhi, which in English is translated as intellect. From Mahat comes Ahamkara or ego or the I principle, which produces 16 categories, which include the mind, the 5 sense organs, the 5 organs of action, the 5 subtle elements or the tanmatras. Now, from these 5 tanmatras originate the 5 grosser elements or the Mahabhutas, which include ether, air, earth, light of fire, and water. Now, this completes the 24 separate entities, and Purusha, who is completely distinct from Prakriti and its evolutes, is the 25th category in the Sāṃkhya philosophy. Gaudapada, in his commentary on Sāṃkhya Karika, writes that one who knows these 25 principles, whatever order of life he may enter, and whether he wear a braided hair or a top knot only or be shaven, he is free of this there is no doubt. I can explain the 21st and the 22nd Karika in a simpler manner from what I have discussed before, which will perhaps put the things into some sort of perspective. See, there are 23 evolutes of Prakriti. We need to concentrate those in which Sattva predominates and those in which Tamas predominates. Now, from our understanding of the characteristics of the three gunas, we know that the material world, including our body, is predominated by tamas. So, they are objective. But we should not assume from this that those evolutes in which sattva predominates are subjective. Why? Because ultimately everything that is produced is Prakriti and therefore material. But because these evolutes are sattvic, meaning they are extremely subtle, they are well fitted to assist Purusha to gain knowledge of the external objects. Because Purusha on its own is unable to cognize anything. In the list of evolutes we have Manas, Ahamkara and Buddhi. And together they are called Antakarana or the internal organ. The main function of the Antakarana is to receive messages from outside and respond to them appropriately. It is supported by the various senses to accomplish its function. You can very well compare it with the modern understanding of the working of the brain and the nervous system. Now, this apparatus, according to the Sāṃkhya system, is specific to each Purusha and in conjunction with certain other factors remains with Purusha throughout his worldly life. And this is what is called his Linga Sharira or the subtle body. Now, this Linga Sharira continues to be with the Purusha in his every transmigration till he achieves final liberation. There are, however, some questions which this system needs to answer and clarify with regard to the exact manner in which these two disparate entities come together. It definitely is a difficult question for the system to answer, for as we call in logic, it clearly brings forth for them the two horns of a dilemma. Understand why I say this. Now, since Purusha and Prakriti are absolutely distinct, how can the two come in contact? Now, the Sāṃkhya system says that there is no actual or real contact between Purusha and Prakriti, but only proximity between the two. Now, the problem is that this proximity doesn't come about all of a sudden. It was there always, which means these periodic happenings of evolution and dissolution cannot be explained, for there would only be evolution in that case. In any case, before passing a judgment, we need to do some research on the system and their theory of evolution. With this point to ponder over, I end my lecture. In the next lecture, I will discuss the evolutes of Prakriti. Thank you so much.